Okay, so finishing up this first vocab lesson, we're going to continue on. So again, I said this at the end of the video, 2 or more segments with the same length. They're called congruent segments. The point that divides a segment into 2 congruent pieces, that is called the midpoint. A geometric figure that divides a segment into 2 congruent pieces is called a segment bisector. So it's not a point we're talking about like a line going through a segment or a ray going through a segment. That is called a segment bisector. All right, so now we're going to backtrack and we are going to go through the pictures and the notation. So a line segment, this would be an example of a line segment. I have a line consisting of 2 endpoints. And remember, points we label with capital letters, so A, B. And so the notation for a line segment is different than from a line. Remember, with a line, we would draw this little line above it and we would write AB, line AB. But with a line segment, we just draw just a segment like this. We do not put dots on the end of that. And then we just put AB. Or this could be called segment BA. Now, if I ask you to find the length of your segment, for length, what we do is we drop the segment bar. So we would just say, find AB without a segment line above it would mean to find the length of segment AB. Now, I just want to kind of clarify that there's not just 2 points on this line segment. This whole line is consistent of an infinite amount of points. You just can't see what they are. But there's so many points on this line, there's an infinite amount. We just didn't label them using the actual dots. Okay? All right. Part of a line that starts at one endpoint and extends forever in one direction, that's a ray. So we're going to start at one endpoint, and then it's going to go forever in one direction. All right, and so when we are naming a ray, we need 2 points on a ray. We need the end point of our ray, and we need another point on our ray. Now, when we name a ray, this is pretty tricky. When we name a ray, we draw a little ray without the end point, but the part that does not have the end point is your end point. And the part that has the arrow on it is the point that's closer to the arrow. So a ray could also be drawn this way. But again, the point that's closer to the arrow, which is B in this situation, needs to be closer to the arrow on your notation. And the end point needs to be the starting part of that ray. So you cannot do the name like this. That would not be acceptable. Okay. Next, opposite rays. These are 2 rays that have a common endpoint and form a straight line. So we have a ray going this way and a ray going this way. And for this, to name your rays, again, you would need other points on your ray. So maybe we have this. There is really no notation for opposite rays, but you could say that ray AC and ray AB are opposite rays. Congruent segments. These are 2 segments with the same length. So for example, if I had segment AB and segment CG, How we would know that they were congruent segments is we would have tick marks. So just little lines that go through. If we have multiple segments congruent, you just keep adding tick marks. So if I had this segment now congruent to this segment, but I knew that they weren't congruent to these two segments up here, then I would just do 2 tick marks, and you keep adding tick marks to represent the different congruent segments. So to show that these are, to notate that these are congruent, you would say segment AB is congruent, so it's an equal to sign with a squiggly above it, to segment CD. Now, if you want to say that they're equal, you would say AB is equal to CD. Now, we use the congruent symbol when we're talking about the two segments being visibly congruent. We would first need to say that they're congruent before saying equal. So equal means that they have equal lengths, all right? We're talking about the measures. So the measures are equal. And so we'll get to that later. But for right now, this is just the congruent symbol. Midpoint. A midpoint is the point that divides a segment into 2 congruent pieces. So I may have segment AC, and I have point B in between A and C. However, just because point B is in between A and C does not necessarily mean that that's the midpoint. You would need the tick marks to represent that AB is congruent to BC. And so that we would then know that B is the midpoint. And how we would just notate that is we would say B is the midpoint of segment AC. All right, and then our last one, segment bisector. This is a geometric figure that divides a segment into 2 congruent pieces. So what I mean by that is if I have segment AC, there's not a point that goes through segment AC, it's a line or a ray. So, oops, let me try to get that more towards the middle. So I have a line, let's say this line is called BD. We would say, and we would need the tick marks, but we would say that line BC is the segment bisector of segment AC. And that brings us to the end of video 1, part 2.